next on the agenda, we have a panel discussion about clinical trials and treatment options, following up on Dr. Hay's presentation. And the distinguished members of our panel include Dr. Hay and include Dr. Arley McCurdy. Dr. McCurdy? There she is. Dr. McCurdy is a clinical hematologist at the Ottawa Hospital and one of the leading myeloma doctors there. And she's also an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa and is really making a difference in the Canadian myeloma community. Another distinguished member is Dr. Paula Neri. She is the scientific director of Precision Oncology Hub at the Arnie Charbonneau Cancer Institute in Calgary, and also an associate professor at the University of Calgary. And some of her work is known worldwide. So this panel will be chaired again by our executive director, Martine Elias.
Thank you so much, David. And David, you're doing an amazing job. I think you deserve a round of applause. I'm hearing so many comments about how excellent our chair is, so thank you very much.
Well, the credit goes to the organizing group, your team, Martine, who really put this together.
I'm so excited to lead this panel because we have, first of all, wonderful women researcher, but young women researchers. So that's very exciting that, we have you as part of our community. Now we've got a period of questions, so please write them down. You can come up to the microphone, but I'm going to start us off. Question about the difference in CAR-Ts being manufactured by industry versus CAR-Ts being manufactured by research center or universities. Can someone explain the difference to me? Because what I hear is that the ones that are being done by universities will be and are a lot more less expensive than those manufactured by industry. Why is that? Paula?
Probably jump in, yes. Thank you, Martine, and all the organizers for inviting me here. So I think the cost depends, I guess, on the local resources. So not surprising, pharma, of course, charges a lot for probably even the same molecule. Just because, the patent, all the resources they need to make the same molecule. At universities, this will be our goal in the future. It will be able to really in-house be able to get these T cells that Annette described very well from a patient, make them to be able to grow faster, recognize the cancer cell, reinfuse fast in the patient. Right now, the trial that we have open even in Calgary is based on a pharma company product. And there is also a time frame we have to consider as well. When I say time frame, so once the T cells are collected from a patient, there are almost 2-3 weeks of waiting list that if we will be able to do in-house the same work, can be definitely can be done in a very short time. So the advantage of having in-house is first the cost that we can definitely drop significantly because we don't have to pay pharma for any kind of product. Number two will be the how fast this product can be made and infused to the patient. So I really appreciate center like in Edmonton. I'm sure in Toronto they are doing the same. They are trying to really make every product in-house because that will be definitely an important plus for all this reagent. Yeah.
Thank you.
And adding to that, I agree completely. If we are proposing, which we are, trying to manufacture CAR T cells locally at our hospitals, so trying to manufacture living drugs, we also need to be absolutely certain that we're doing it right and meeting Health Canada standards. So there is a lot of work ongoing across the country right now, including multiple researchers and others trying to figure out how we can actually turn this into a reality. Because right now, the approved drug for leukemia and lymphoma is the industry one, manufactured centrally. And we have a lot of work to do if we are to get a similar standard of manufacturing at hospitals. I think it's doable, but it's probably one of the most ambitious challenges we've taken on yet in our careers.
Dr. McCurdy, I know Ottawa is the big center for Karti. What do you have to say?
So I agree with my co-panelists. And I just sort of wanted to add to that, I think one of the concerns that patients often have when these new, expensive, complicated technologies come is that they're only going to be at one center or they're only going to be at another center, and Canada's so geographically vast that obviously is a concern. I just think in the groups that are manufacturing CAR T cells outside of industry, a lot of work has been put into the grants that have developed those platforms to include branching out to other centers. So I'm not sure if you touched on that in your talk about the Malteni machines. So there are ways that these CAR T cells can be made in smaller centers, and so we are actually working on how to distribute them across the country. And we're looking also at doing that in a financially feasible way, where we do have several centers that are doing the manufacturing and then distributing them out to the other hospitals. And so I just want folks to know that there's exhaustive efforts being done to make sure that this is a national initiative independent of pharma and not just one or two centers.
Great, thank you. Actually, we've learned a couple of days ago that the CAR Ts are coming, and they're probably going to be here sooner than we maybe have anticipated. And the issue of delivering the treatment is a big one. Right now we have only a few centers in Canada that are able to do the CAR Ts, but the issue is bringing it to more centers. And what is your thought on how quickly that could be done? Because it's great to have them available, but if patients cannot get access to them, then that's an issue.
So it's my crystal ball is not working very well this morning. It's really hard to put an exact timeline on these things because, it's not just manufacturing the product and delivering it, it's assuming that all the trial results proceed as we expect them to proceed and all the approvals proceed. And so there's, it's very easy, a wrench can put 3 or 6 months into that process. So, I would say that in the next 12 to 24 months, most provinces in Canada will have access to CAR T therapy in myeloma. I think it also really speaks to the importance of national organizations, both from a patient advocacy perspective, like Myeloma Canada, and also from the research perspective through MCRN, where we have information about what's going on in other provinces or other centers, so that I may not have a product, but Toronto might, and so I can refer a patient there and vice versa. And so that, I don't know exactly when things are going to roll out, and and we all know that the provinces are also not always on the same page. So that's a long answer to I don't really know. I don't know if you...
Can I add one more thing to it? So we are all excited about the CAR T, but I want you to be careful as well. So don't think the CAR T is that one infusion will cure all the patients. So we all are excited about that, don't get us wrong, but there are other immunotherapy that they are equally, I will say even better characterized. We are more available. I'm thinking about daratumumab, for example, the monoclonal antibody was described earlier, the BiTEs, that they have this ability to go after the tumor and the Tcell. So I'm personally more excited about this than the CAR T, because so far the one we have actually even opened, the BB2121, and Annette actually mentioned during her talk, they are not persistent, meaning in some patients they don't make a difference because they are probably we're using too late. Probably the tumor are smart enough to change, and so the CAR T don't recognize the tumor anymore. So it's true, you have to be excited about this coming, but don't think that is the only option that can cure myeloma. We are getting smarter to even understand more about the biology of the disease. So think about other options in the same space of immunotherapy as equal important.
Thank you for giving us the current sort of lay of the land with Karti. And, I hear that a lot of questions from patients about Karti, but what I'm getting is that it may not be quite ready for prime time in myeloma. There's more research definitely needed. So moving on to other therapy, this question is about Sellin XOR. We have a patient in the audience who's on Sellin XOR, and Dr. Hay, you didn't mention it in your presentation, and wondering if you could give us a few words on Sellin XOR and what's the status of this drug currently. Thank you.
Sure, I will start and then maybe hand on to others who know more. There were 2 slides about Sellin XOR, but I knew Gabriele was going to be sitting there with the 15-minute, 10-minute, 5-minute. So it was one of those that came out. I'm going to put it in the category of very promising, where Canada have been playing a leading role in its development through clinical trials, and maybe hand over to Paola, who knows more.
Yeah, so as you know, in Calgary, we have done, actually even in Toronto, I think the combination of Sellin XOR, Velcade Dex, or Sellin XOR, Revlimid, POM, and Dex has been highly actually enrolled several patients. So I can tell you for some of our patients, because we have enrolled several multi-refractory. What I mean by that, patients they've been exposed to several lines of therapy, and even if it's not probably the easiest drug to be to take, because there are a lot of GI toxicity. Patients feel they lose weight, they feel unwell, they have nausea, vomiting. For some patients, made the difference. So is a drug. So first of all, is a new agent because it goes after a protein called XPO1, which is important for the cells to bring some factor from a nucleus to the cytoplasm, as vice versa. So what we know about this drug, that if you block this protein, the cells are actually going under a sort of a stress, and the cancer cells, they die. So there are patients, and probably the patient on the audience is actually getting some benefit from it. So it's, for some patients, can be an answer. The reason why we don't use it right away, because there is some side effect associated with it. Now there is a large phase 3 trial, as Annette said. After we go from a phase 1 to a phase 2, the phase 3 is really the one will give us an answer if it's really more effective than what we already have approved in Canada. And this phase 3 is actually, it's called Boston trials. You can find some information, of course, online. And this is trial when we compare Velcade Dex with Velcade Dex Sellin XOR. So it's enrolling very well. I can tell you some of our patients do extremely well, especially the high-risk patients. So the patient that you have will be called deletion 17, 414. So I think for patients with a more aggressive disease can be an answer. And again, the phase 3 will be probably enrolling still more patients. So we'll have some answer in terms of response and activity in a short time. But another very exciting drug for sure.
Excellent, thank you. Question here about the benefits and disadvantages between daratumumab and the GSK BCMA product, given that they tackle the immune system.
That's a very astute question. And it's a bit early. The question is about daratumumab, which is our anti-CD38 antibody, which is commercially available now in, I think, all the provinces. Yeah, most provinces.
Except the Maritimes.
Right. It's unfortunately the usual, but we're working on that.
Yes, we are.
And there's a new anti-BCMA antibody, which is a bit different. It's an antibody with a warhead on it, and it actually delivers a drug. And I would say that it's perhaps a bit early to be able to compare these things. So the GSK antibody, there's the advantage there is that it's once a month. And so it's one infusion a month, which is obviously a very appealing thing. But our experience with it is really limited to, there's one first-in-human study that's been published, and through Myeloma Canada, we now have a phase 1 study where it's combined with pomalidomide. And thus far, our patients have had good responses to that, and it's been well tolerated. But there are some challenges with it. The drug, there's common receptors on the cornea, as there are in some of the blood cells, and so patients get blurry vision, and there's a concern about blindness, which is obviously a big side effect. And so we are still working on what the best dose of that drug is, and when the best time to give it is and what the best partner is with it. And so there are some theoretical advantages to that drug, but there's also some concerns. And so it's a bit premature to say how exactly it's going to compare with DARA and which line of therapy it's going to end up in. I can say that it's a very exciting drug, and I think we're all very excited to use it in our patients, but it's early days with respect to knowing exactly how to do that.
Thank you. A question here about the use of embryonic stem cells in allogenic transplant. I know there's some centers in Montreal that do this, and what are your thoughts? Who wants to start?
I don't know, I'm obviously biased saying that, but I'm not a big fan of allotransplant per se. I mean, we're learning, we have so many other options right now that in my mind, and again, I'm biased, I'm sure that my co-panelists, colleagues, they will think differently, but personally, I really think that the answer to, because now we know much more about the disease. We know about the cancer cells, the microenvironment where the cells grow. I think our effort really need to be on more in immunotherapy. I mean, it's not the case that you spend most of your presentation on immunotherapy, because I think it's where we all need to think, because now we have a way to unlock really all the immune cells. They usually don't recognize myeloma. Now we have a way to definitely make them aware of the cancer. So in my mind, that approach is still something they need to be tested, need to be further evaluated. In my mind, it's really, at least what in the future, I'm anticipating to see really patient treated more with immunotherapy than as actually in other solid tumor is already the case. So because again, the allo transplant bring with it a lot of the mortality rate that is not acceptable, is still too high. The concept that the stem cells in myeloma is still a concept that is very controversial still. There are people, they don't believe they are really there, and there are people, they think that is the cause of the relapse. So there is still a lot of unknown, and in my mind, it's still not the most exciting among all the options we have. But I'm sure my colleagues will think differently.
No, I was
a controversial question for sure.
It is a controversial question, a good question, and I, just sort of jokingly, I would say over the last couple of years, I've had my come to Jesus moment with Paula, and I tend to agree with everything that she just said. I mean, we do allogeneic transplant is so appealing because it's curative in patients with leukemia and some lymphomas, and so we all want that, obviously. And so that hope has not died in myeloma because we want that so badly for patients. Some centers, including ours, still do allogeneic transplants in very rare circumstances in myeloma. But in my opinion, it really is just a very aggressive chemo. I don't think it cures patients with myeloma. I've never seen it cure a patient with myeloma. And our other therapies that are emerging are much less toxic, and I think afford better opportunity to manipulate the immune system. And so I agree, yeah.
Thank you.
Dr.
We're
Hay?
all singing from the same songbook. But I would just point out, this panel is made up of people who are not bone marrow transplanters. Now, this clearly is still a relevant question, and if you had a panel sitting up here of people who do bone marrow transplants, you may get a slightly different perspective. But I personally am in agreement that I would only consider it in a very, very select number of patients. It certainly would not be allogeneic transplant, embryonic or other, would not be a go-to early on in treatment for the vast majority of people.
Thank you. Question here about timing of joining a clinical trial. So when you're on a treatment and you're stable, should you consider joining a clinical trial, and when should that be appropriately introduced or discussed with either a patient or from a patient to a clinician?
So it's an interesting question. So I guess first disclosure from me is I'm very pro clinical trial. So I think a well-designed clinical trial is often the best option for a patient. So I think all patients should have the opportunity to discuss being in a clinical trial. Personally, so a couple of things. Unless a trial is specifically designed for patients who are stable on their current therapy, it should not be considered. And the vast majority of clinical trials are designed for either newly diagnosed patients or patients who are progressing. So you will not be eligible for a clinical trial unless you are in fact in one of those two situations 99% of the time. And with some asterisks and caveats, I would say that if a therapy is working and the disease is controlled and the quality of life is good, carry on. That's a generalist, but yeah.
But I will agree, though, that trials, at least in our mind, my mind, is one of the, in a way, best option when the disease, for example, come back and there are already some options that they are out of the table because patients don't respond anymore. So clinical trials are definitely an answer because being in Canada, as you know, we don't get access to drug very easily. So the clinical trial give the advantage if you are, of course, you meet the criteria for inclusion. They give you the new drugs that are already available in the States and drugs that as a community, we believe that can make a difference. So it's not the case that, for example, you have seen now finally daratumumab approved from this year, January, after all the effort that many centers have done to open clinical trial where daratumumab was a component. So the trial that we tried to open in the center, first of all, tried to answer really question for different group of patients, but at the end of the day, we want to give option to patients. So I think to answer the question, we try to really offer a different level. Newly diagnosed, there are new also trial for patients they are really newly diagnosed, especially the transplant ineligible, where even daratumumab is really given upfront because we all believe that even if we move this therapy upfront, we can even have a better response. So again, I'm biased probably saying that, but clinical trial definitely a very good option for treatment.
I suspect Dr. Hay is pro-clinical trials.
Yeah, I'm
just a sneaking suspicion.
So you can tell by the accent I trained in the UK. And actually there, it is quite strikingly different in that pretty much 99% of every patient with myeloma newly diagnosed enrolled on the clinical trial. And there would be one clinical trial across the nation that was just assumed to be standard of care in a way. Now, of course, people were consented and given the opportunity, but almost everybody did. And there was a meeting once a week. We have these meetings here as well, where you have to present new cases, you have to outline the disease and your management plan to all your peers to ensure they agree. And there was once I missed a clinical trial opportunity and did not offer it, and boy, did I get in trouble. So that was just the ethos which I was trained. And in addition to everything you've said, of course, we're always looking for new therapies to improve disease control in myeloma, but we're also often looking for other ways to improve quality of life. And one of the trials that I enrolled a couple of patients into was actually looking at a blood thinner, just a tablet, to see if taking the blood thinner reduced blood clots or caused increased bleeding. So that sort of question is really relevant if you can prevent a blood clot that may be symptomatic. Or sometimes there may be ones about bones, things like looking at bisphosphonates, is one better than another. So it's not just direct anti-myeloma therapy, it's also all the other things that matter, including psychology and emotional aspects.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a question over there.
Use the microphone, please.
Yes, it's on.
Very
Quickly,
very
Norma.
Simple. Can you, when you apply to go on a clinical trial, can you still go back to treatments that are not in clinical trial phases? I mean, is the clinical trial always at the end of the line for the patient, or can it be that you can go back to a treatment that you sort of bypass because of the opportunity of better treatment?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So no, participating in a clinical trial does not mean that you can't go back to other conventional therapies. So, if you had taken a standard therapy at first line and at first relapse you were on a clinical trial, when that didn't work, you could go back to third line on the approved or funded drugs. I think one of the challenges, though, is, and we've chatted as a group of researchers a lot in the last number of months and years, and even quite vividly a couple of days ago, about in general, once you've been exposed to a drug, you can't use it again from a funding perspective. So not necessarily from a biological perspective or an efficacy perspective, but if you were on a clinical trial of drug A and you progressed and went on drug B, and then we wanted to use drug A again, the provinces would say, well, you've already had that drug, so you actually can't have it. So the rules vary a little bit from province to province and jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but in general, once you've been refractory to a drug, it can be difficult to access again, even if that drug was given in the context of a trial. But it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be used again. So we would often attempt to reuse drugs or access drugs in different ways, but it is a very complicated matrix. And so if you have used a drug in a context of a trial, it can be difficult to access it.
Just to add to that point, we're working with other cancer organizations to try to change that with governments, because we don't think it's fair that because you're on a clinical trial and you've used certain agents that, later down the road you can't use them again in maybe different settings. And we're getting some traction in some provinces.
Yeah, and this is very important because, as you know, myeloma being a chronic disease, we often go back to something we've used before. So this is very important. For example, in Alberta, it's not an issue because we can often go back to a drug that we have used before. But in Ontario, especially, you have a lot of limitation on how many cycles, when did you use the drug. So I think it's important that across the country we get the same uniform answer, meaning that especially for myeloma patients, we know they live longer because we have a lot of options. We should be able to go back to something that worked before. And for us, at least what we think is we can go back to something that worked because give you a good response and lasts as well. So we always go back to something that was, again, work earlier and give you a lot of what we call long PFS, meaning disease-free for at least more than 6 or even 12 months.
Thank you. We have some really good questions, and I just want to make sure we give them, the right time. So I'm just going to go one question per panelist, if that's okay, for the next little bit. So why is Dex used in most treatment? The quintessential question for myeloma patients. Dr. A.
Dexamethasone, it's kind of like cheese. It makes everything better.
I call bacon, actually. I actually call it the bacon as well. So bacon, cheese, I think we are on the same path.
But just to be slightly more complete in that answer, it does seem to improve disease control with certain drugs. In drugs like Sellin XOR, combination with dexamethasone seems to reduce side effects. Now, we know many of you hate it, and Aldo Del Col repeatedly says, come up with a regimen that doesn't have dex. So we're trying. We hear you. We know it's tough. But for now, it seems to work really well.
Okay. Dr. McCurdy, this question is about a trial where they used measles in which one patient was cured. So what are your thoughts? And what happened to those trials?
I might not be the best person to answer this, so I don't know if either of you feel strongly about answering this question, but I'm not sure that patient is actually cured. Other than perhaps had a long remission. And so, vaccine therapy, so that was a vaccine, and vaccine therapy is still there in myeloma, and there are centers who are looking at that, so basically trying to capitalize on antigenic stimulation in the immune system. I think we have not seen prolonged promising remissions with most vaccine therapies, but there are still active centers looking at it. So I don't actually think that person was cured, and I don't think the measles vaccine is going to be a winner in myeloma.
I think we get nods from everyone. Okay, thank you. Is there anything that we can do to enhance our immune system that can make these immune drugs more effective?
I'll take it, not because I have an answer, just because it's my turn.
You can
no,
tell I had 3 kids. It was 1, 2, 3.
See, I'm following. So definitely nothing specifically. And what we are learning, though, by using this immunotherapy is that if you use them early, you respond better. This is, for example, what we have learned from daratumumab clinical trials. So, for example, I'll give you an example. So, this drug we think is extremely effective. We have a lot of patients respond, but some patients, they don't do well with daratumumab. We have some research, and this bring me back to the lab in a way. But for example, we are thinking that probably these patients, they don't do well because we use them too late. And what we have found is that when we use this drug too late, we don't get all the benefit the same molecule can give. So the approach is, in a way, partially answer your question, is the fact that we know if we use the same regimen early on, we can get a better response because your immune cells are less exhausted. When I say exhausted, because they are able to be still reactivated, go after the tumor. If we wait too long, if we use the same agent, for example, 5-6 line of therapy, maybe the T cells are so exhausted that cannot be reactivated. So there is nothing really from your end you can do. It's something more from us to think about using the approach at the right time. So that is partially answer your question. I don't know if you want to add.
Can I say one
Yes,
thing?
of course,
Mom?
yes. Yes, you can.
So I appreciate where this question is coming from because we talk about it a lot in the clinic, and because everybody's really motivated to do everything they can, and so things from taking different supplements to eating certain foods to alkalinizing the water or eating from the blood type, and I think just please be careful because. This is an industry or some aspects of care that are not particularly tightly regulated and very expensive and also not risk-free. And so there are many natural supplements that actually interact with some of the treatments that patients are on and can have some detrimental effects to liver and kidney. So I think just keeping eyes and ears open and talking to your healthcare providers about these. Don't assume that things are safe. And I think most of us want to have those discussions with you and are open to exploring opportunities. But just a word of just be a little bit cautious.
Martin, there is a question.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Can of worms.
back there. It's coming.
Hi, just a general question. What are your thoughts regarding the immune system in terms of nutrition and lifestyle?
Yes, and clearly, as the others have said, that's something that we know everyone is motivated to try and do as much as they can to help themselves. So it's always good to eat a healthy diet. It's always good to remain active. If as much as anything, to minimize your risk of other diseases. Because if someone has something like diabetes or heart failure or kidney failure, that can certainly make treatment of myeloma much harder, and there may be certain medications you simply can't get because of those other diseases. So I think that's where I would emphasize the mainstay is take a general healthy approach to life. I don't think it makes a specific difference that we know of right yet to myeloma cancer itself, but it has an overall impact on general well-being. That's not to say you can't have chocolate too.
Yeah, I know, and I will probably add
cheese.
to the multivitamin concept. So we get this question all the time, what do you think of a multivitamin? The only vitamin we want you to take is the vitamin D, because help your bones, because we live in Canada, a lot of inside, so we do not get exposed to the sun. The multivitamin can be dangerous because can actually feed more the cancer cells. So always be careful and discuss with us everything that even for you are natural product that you buy maybe in the herbal base, so basically you think are natural, but they may interact with what you are on. So always make sure that we know about and we give you the okay for that. There
Very
was a
good
question
point.
over there.
I have a question over here.
Quick question. As I understand, myeloma cell disease has different markers for each individual. Is there a prevalence of certain markers based on ethnicity, gender, environmental influences? And second part, can I request a marker from my, like, what is my myeloma marker from my doctor?
So genomics.
I think so. Yeah.
Who wants to take that one?
You're probably the best one to answer.
Okay. So they actually give me the
no
microphone, no pressure. So it's true that myeloma is very different among each patient. We know actually that myeloma change within the same patient too. So in the future, I will say, because there are very few centers right now that can offer this kind of analysis, but we are working on providing what we call genomic profile, like looking at the genetic makeup of the cancer cell for each individual patient. When I say it's not available everywhere because it's still done in a research base. In lab, they still don't have the accreditation to provide that information to clinician then be used for patient. But we are all understanding, coming from your point, that every patient is different. So in the future, I will add, instead of just having blood work, we're probably going to have, in addition to that, another report when we actually able to tell you what the tumor cells look like in your case, meaning there is any mutation, meaning anything different in the DNA of the cells that is unique to one patient, and then we have a drug specific for that. So this is what we are going to see in the future, doing what we call personalized therapy, where based on this genetic makeup of a cancer cell in that specific patient, we know already which drug to use, which drug not to use, because we may know already in advance that you will be resistant to it. And so we are going to be really able to provide you the best therapy with the less side effect, and in a way saving also costs on the health system, because at the point we don't embark on immunotherapy if your cells they are not suitable to. But this is something that we are doing on a research base right now, but I'm sure that we will see more of that because now the genomic testing can be done even at less expensive, maybe in every single center.
Thank you. Question here that yesterday, I think it was Dr. Reese who mentioned this, that second stem cell transplant are starting to, not be sort of considered as much as they would have been in the past, given that they're new treatments. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. I guess nobody wants to contradict Dr. Reese.
No,
No,
I
just
mean, I think we would all agree. So just so folks know, I think most centers still collect enough stem cells for 2 transplants in many patients. A transplant does not work as well the second time. So the remission after a second transplant is about 50% of that of the first. So if it was 4 years after the first transplant, 2 years after the second, et cetera. And so when that is competing essentially with some of the other newer therapies that are less toxic, we are moving away from second transplants. They still do have a role in some patients, and so it's not the wrong thing to do for a patient, but it's in a space where once it was the only option, and now it's facing 8 or 10 other things, which is a good place.
Good.
And often the second transplant can also be used to boost your count back. So we do sometimes as a bridge, we call bridge to some other therapy, because again, when you get the boost of your stem cell back, your count that may be low for the therapy you've been on can actually bounce back. They can become normal, and then you can be maybe eligible for other trial. But again, it's not really our first option anymore when the disease come back.
Okay, we have a question here for Sophia. And then we'll go.
Yeah, it's working. So my question, there are 2. One, the first one about Karti cell. It's wonderful that we have it in Canada. The fact that recently about allogenic or off-shelf Karti cell is coming to the picture, for planning for future, how would that impact the autologous, the one that you are currently manufacturing? The second question about how we can expand the inclusion criteria to get more patients to be eligible, particularly considering majority of myeloma patients are older patients, so the age restriction, rather than going, as you said, how frail they are, and try to include, so that way we get more of a real-world data and impact of that drug in different, diverse patient. It will help the researcher, it will add to it, and the older patients, so-called, which is significant number of myeloma patients, will benefit out of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can start at that. Both very good questions. So the question is looking on to the next wave, which I did not go into. I spoke about CAR T cells that for now are very personalized, made from an individual's own T lymphocytes. But there is discussion as to, could we make a product that could be off the shelf? You could have one product that would do for many people, and there certainly would be efficiency and scale there. Now, one of the avenues being explored is CAR NK cells, so another immune type of cell, natural killer cells, and perhaps they may offer an off-the-shelf product. However, even that, you're still going to need some sort of matching, and people believe this is still very much a research question. You may actually need about 10 different types to be able to have a different product for different people.
Sorry, we're going to have to go to the next question because I have other questions. Sorry, unless you want just a clarification. Okay. The microphone.
Yeah.
No.
Who knows? Lots of people are asking. And it's a very, very pertinent and relevant question. And with regards to clinical trial eligibility, absolutely. I think we're all believers, and we try, and we should try harder to make the eligibility criteria broader so more people can participate, and then the results are more generalizable. Now, of course, that's going to be in later stage trials because you do not want to put people at undue risk early on. So in select settings, absolutely.
I think too, there is, in most trials, almost all trials, there's no upper age limit. So, we do have patients in their 90s who are on clinical trials. With respect to cellular therapy particularly, one of the people in my training, when we talked about auto transplant in older patients, is, you can really unmask the old person. And you can take a really, really good 75-year-old and turn them into a really, really bad 75 when you do therapy that's really aggressive. And biology is still going to happen. Everyone's getting older, which is a good thing. But we have to be careful that we're not shortening people's lives with these therapies, and the aggressive cellular therapies have the potential to do that. And so, yes, there are patients who are going older and older and older on the CAR T trials, but there is a limit to how much we can ask our bodies to do, and we don't know exactly what age that's going to be. So we do have to be careful about that.
If we'll get a microphone to you, but I'm going to ask a quick question about the controversy around the high dose vitamin C.
Yeah, I'm not very, I'm a very, obviously biased in a way because I want to have data to support anything. If I give you an answer, I want to be confident in that answer, and there are no data showing in patients with myeloma on active therapy, if you take vitamin C, that can be helpful. But I have patients that are taking it. Sometimes they don't even tell me because they know my answer will be, please stop it. Unfortunately, we need to go, especially when we have this new agent, we don't know what are the interaction. In my mind, one example I give to the patient is patient on Valcade. You always know when you start your Valcade, we tell you, please don't take any green tea. And why is that? So patient come back and say, why you're telling me that? Because there was studies showing that the main ingredient of the green tea that you will think is healthy, natural, actually was affecting the activity of the drug. So this was a simple example how something natural can actually impair the activity of the drug. So we always want you to be extremely cautious, and you will get our probably a little bit different opinion, but overall, the message is always be careful because they can be can actually harm and instead of helping what you're on.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ditto. Okay, we have a
recall
question back there, and then we're going to close.
Hi, sorry. So I know you mentioned earlier, oh, is that okay? Clinical trials being appropriate, like in combination with therapies. So if someone's already on the CyBorD protocol for a newly diagnosed patient, how can they access these clinical trials at the same time? They can't, or is
no,
that okay?
No. I mean, if you're on a therapy that is working,
Right.
I mean, it would be the wrong thing to do just clinically
Okay.
to switch. But really, the time for enrollment in a drug intervention clinical trial is newly diagnosed or at the time of relapse.
So it would be before they started that CyBorD.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Last question to Robin, and then I'm going to close the session. Very short one,
A
please.
very short, I'll just make this short. This is kind of a comment, a small question, very short, and a plea. So this has been really exciting, and I think we can see, and David mentioned, just the real importance of the clinical work and the research that's being done. But as patients, and this is wonderful having so many people here, obviously healthy, obviously enthusiastic, the advocacy becomes the next piece, accessibility to these developments, and particularly being able to use drugs at an earlier stage because they're approved on a very limited basis. So as patients, we have a political voice in our provinces to get access to these drugs. And I would encourage you all to take on a role of becoming more involved. In Ontario, we've got an advocacy committee. Each province, I mean, through your support groups, are doing things. But you need to get the province to support these, to fund them, to understand that they have to move forward. If you've got private insurance, you may be lucky, but the majority, many do not. So I just put this plea out, and certainly there are many in here that are involved in the Ontario Advocacy Committee. We'd be happy to have you work with us, and others also. And certainly with Myeloma Canada, when they put out a plea, they're working so hard to support this, and Martina's taking a lead role in this, so I'd really encourage you all, even in a small way, to become engaged.
Thank you, Robin. Wow. I just want to sort of point you to our website. If you're interested in finding out about clinical trial, there is a tool that's called a personal trial finder. And what you go, and you can find it under the clinical trial section, and you can enter where you live, what stage of your cancer or your myeloma, if you want to participate in a phase 1, 2, 3, or 4, how far you're willing to travel, and it will search based on the parameters that you put in for a clinical trial that is available to you. It will indicate if it's actively recruiting or if it will be opening soon, and if it's going to be opening soon, you can put a notice for it to send you sort of a note that the clinical trial is open. So there's ways to find out about clinical trials. I mean, very quickly, Michelle is the expert, and Michelle's going to go through it later. So, that's definitely a very good tool. One thing is, and maybe in a very quick sort of few sentence, we talked about Kartis, we talked about the bites. What is far in the horizon right now? If you looked in your telescope, could you see new development that are very, very early that could be promising for multiple myeloma?
I mean, target therapy probably. So target therapy means really based on what your tumor cell look like. Maybe one day we'll be able to offer you the best therapy based on just targeting what your tumors really specifically express. But we're really far from it a bit because, again, the genomic study need to be further characterized, available even more in every center. But we are going, in the future, we'll have personalized therapy even for patients with myeloma.
Okay. Thank you very much. Back to David.